Can everybody hear me? Great. Oops. Let's get it up on. Thank you. I don't feel so short anymore. Welcome, everybody, to our reading series, Poets in the Conversation Room. I'm Kimberly Taylor, co-publisher of Annapolis Home magazine. And before we get started with our fabulous reading for you, I'd just like to say thank you to Nora Demleitner for helping us get the series going, as well as the fabulous Bruce Douglas. And extra special thanks to our co-sponsor today, the Banneker Douglas Tubman Museum. Great to see you. Yeah, you just had your naming series last night, I heard, renaming the museum. That's so wonderful. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you to one of our hosts, the fabulous Grace Cavalieri. She is Maryland's 10th Poet Laureate, founder of the renowned 48-year-old Library of Congress radio program called The Poet and the Poem. And if I kept going, she would get very embarrassed because she does have a mischievous side that keeps us all very happy and entertained. Welcome, Grace.
Thank you. My co-host, Kimberly Taylor, and Robert Haywood, publisher of Annapolis Home magazine, which is the Vogue of the nation, and so happy to sponsor poetry. Well, first I would like to say that we wish to dedicate this series to Eva Brann, whose light will be forever holding up this institution, forever. And then to our poet, Ramika Bingham Risher. She has 5 books out. 4 have won national awards. Save some for somebody else, Ramika. And she is well known. She has just come back from the Dodge Festival where she was featured. This is her 30th poetry reading in a row, and she's wrapping up her tour with St. John's College. Now, of her work, well, ancestors are everywhere. They are in the air. They are in our DNA. They are in our memories. And they are in our dreams. What Ramika has done is made them permanent on paper forever in what we call the finer air of poetry. Here is my beloved Ramika Bingham Risher.
Thank you, guys. Grace does have a mischievous side, so we won't give her too much grace. But really, I've known Grace almost 20 years now, and everywhere I go, she is one of the only people where you can walk into a room and everyone loves her and everyone bows to her. Whatever she says to do, we do. So thank you, Grace. And thank you so much, Kimberly and St. John's. This is my 30th reading for this book, For Room Swept Home, which came out in February. So I appreciate you all being here for that. Thank you. But this is my first reading at a university where the first person from the university that I met who walked into the reading was the university's president. So please give it up for St. John's president, Nora. That says a lot about what you love and support around here, so we appreciate you. All right, let's read some poems. I know you guys are accustomed to this because I'm the 4th poet in the series, in the conversation room, the 3rd in the conversation room, okay? So let's talk a little bit. You want to stand or sit? I can stand. I'm very short. So if I sit down, I might disappear for the live stream. So I'm going to stand for the 30 minutes, and so I can see everybody when we start talking about the Q&A and the poem. I want to make sure I can see your faces. So let's talk a little bit about the book. So Room Swept Home is my 5th book. It's a book of of all kinds of things. If I see some of you have it in your hand, so I thank you so much. But it's poems, photographs, historical and family photographs. There's a whole family tree that we got made for the book. It starts with a lyric essay about the Smithsonian in DC. So it's kind of a hodgepodge of everything. But that's what happens when you start writing about family. You find they're expansive and they need more room than you're actually used to, right? And so the book is about two of my grandmothers who intersected in Petersburg in 1941, Petersburg, Virginia in 1941. Unbeknownst to them, they were within 1 mile of each other. My great, great, great grandmother, paternal grandmother, Minnie Folks, was interviewed for the WPA ex-slave narratives. At that time, she was born in 1859, born enslaved, and was interviewed at a time when people started realizing, oh, these folks are in their 70s and their 80s. They're going to start disappearing. So we need to make sure that we're documenting, what happened with these people's lives. So she grew up in Petersburg and was interviewed there. And my maternal grandmother, Mary Knight, who at the other end of her life, she was only 18. She had her first child. She suffered from postpartum and was sent to the Central Lunatic Asylum for the Negro Insane, which was in Petersburg and was within 1 mile of Minnie's house. Now, when I figured this out, I'm a poet, so it was too much to bear. I had to figure out their stories and try to write backwards, into their lives and up through my own. So I'll read some of those poems that are in their voices, and I'll read some that are in mine. And I know I started my timer late, so I'll take 2 minutes off. Don't get in trouble. Okay. So I'm going to start with this book. Also, when you decide you're going to delve into family, what you're also delving into is American history, right? And so it ended up being lots and lots of research. In the back on the acknowledgments page, when you usually thank your family, I start with thanking God, and then a whole page of librarians just comes right after them. So doing this kind of work, you're in the archives and you discover things that you just never knew. One of the things that I discovered was there's a Virginia slave birth index, like an encyclopedia. I don't know if anybody's ever seen these. I hadn't, and I fancy myself a prudent student of history. And so I was in this room with these indices that went around, probably the span of this room, a whole top shelf. And when I started turning in the indices, I noticed that every single slave that was born on Christmas or New Year's. Huh, there you go. Whoever got it, you understand that somebody is changing history, right? So I decided to let my grandmother Minnie write her own birth story. Birth story. I wasn't born on Christmas, though this is what some folks will tell you. Some folks say everyone born slave was born on Christmas or New Year's Day. Some folks always lying. Some pretend we don't know how we got here or when, but I am made of memory and the impossible long hour. I cherish every part that was mine or my mother's, and she'd tell you too. I came in the world with the sun bearing its full heat, the day as steady as the pain. She sweat through the pallet of hay on the floor. The dirt and rocks felt like coals underneath her. A friend there, rooted. A woman I'd call aunt for years, gray-headed and firm, had a guiding hand the children knew to follow, pressed on the belly, held mother's hips in place, helped her stand when laying down, wouldn't move me. Found grease to ease me out with the water and blood, and I remember what my mother said the woman told me. God brought you here. God made you free. Jesus was born outdoors on a night when the shepherds slept in the field free from frost, no snow. Christmas wasn't his day either, but someone, somewhere, saw fit to give him what they thought he deserved, what suited them. Save the truth for later. Thank you. I appreciate y'all. So some of the work of poets is the work of reclamation, right? Obviously that wasn't a story that I could have gotten directly from Minnie. She passed in 1945, so about 40 years before I was born. But she obviously through the work that she left in the archive with her narrative, and also my paternal grandmother, who's still very much alive in New Jersey, the book is dedicated to her, was born in Minnie's bed and was with Minnie until she was 5 years old, and Minnie raised her. So she passed on so many of these stories to me. So much of this was also just talking to family about what we hadn't heard just yet. So that was part of the bent of the book as well. So I'm just going to move between the two of them, if that's okay. And we have plenty of time for questions after. Yeah, and so we have plenty of time for questions, so I hope you're jotting stuff down. And if you like me and you real nosy and you just want to know family stuff, that's okay too. We can ask questions about poems or just ask questions about, the stuff that you're hearing. So my other grandmother, Mary Knight, was the kind of grandmother who never once, I don't remember one time her raising her voice. I was the 15th grandchild, and I was holding her hand when she passed in 2007. We were very close, but she was the kind of grandmother that would get you out of spankings with your mama. Don't hit that baby. She didn't mean anything, right? She was the kind of grandmother who would bake you cheese biscuits and strawberry pie, but really the most docile person I ever knew in real life. And so this is what happens when she is taken to the asylum. And as you can imagine, she turned into a very different person. And all of this is true. Mary, taken to the Central Lunatic Asylum. She will jump, she says. She no longer cares for the child after the fire of the mind has taken her clothes and shoes, her pious tongue, and thrown them into the street. The suffering grows in her, settles in her belly like snuff, and nothing comes as it should. Not a groan or holler, not the doctor on time, just the child mangling everything, and after, no blood. 2 stories up, she warns everyone the power and the spirit are coming. And when she gets a hold of the underside of her husband's skin, taking it with her over the steep ledge, with her newborn screaming in the distance between them, the siren choir approaching with its fire and wings, her husband is dumbstruck when they ask if she is herself, while she curses him, swearing in a rage, the words coming like spirit, her fists moving as fast as the mind, and everyone at arm's length, bloodied and weary, until she is handcuffed and sped away. God willing, she says to her husband, and something indecipherable as he signs the large green ledger, finally reverent, admitting the God who led him here, who transfigured and loosed another, not unlike herself, a body outside her body, coming in another name. Oh, you guys are very sweet. I can tell who's been to poetry readings. Thank you. And we can move through these things. We can talk through these things. You can make noise through the poems. I love I hit a line and somebody said, that's my favorite right there. So all you want to. Through these poems, and we can talk them as well. So as you can imagine, writing a book like this, I knew that I was going to have to start in trauma. So I try to move the book so that it ends in beauty, and so that's where we'll end the reading as well, right? But there was so much going on in their lives that I thought it was interesting to not let them become one extraordinary incident, in an otherwise ordinary and wonderful life. And so I'll just kind of move back and forth between watching Grace and Kimberly this morning. They took us, my cute, sweet husband is here with me. Hey, cute, sweet husband. And they took us to a wonderful lunch, and the camaraderie between them reminds me that as women, and particularly women in the arts, without dear friends, it's hard to make things happen. And so in the lives of these women, my grandmothers as well, and we all know this, when we look back in the history books, you don't see, and also his best friend came over and made him dinner when he was sick. But we know that's what happens to take care of folks. And so in the lives of both of those women, their girlfriends were something that were just really important to them, and they kind of passed that down to us as well in the family. So I wrote a love poem for girlfriends. Yeah. And this is the tenderness of one woman for another. And this is in Minnie's section. It's in Minnie's voice. And so you'll get to hear some of the things that were happening in her life, but mostly about the people who cared for her. The tenderness of one woman for another. There was little play when I was a child. I shared secrets with no one, had no dress-up clothes or bows. I missed other little girls then. My daughters were my dolls, spitting up and weary of sleep. I was so grateful when the women came, took the crying babies from my arms, took my wash, scrubbed my kitchen to sparkling. I could barely lift my head. I was so tired, but they laid their hands on me. We our own assembly. Passing victuals, counting heads and nickels, bragging on children come by birth or fortune, loving folks' dirt, harboring it along with light, slapping our thighs when the telling gets good. We are happy to grow old together, to cross the changing streets, to be near each other, though our floorboards have worn thin. They sat watch with me when Thomas was dying. After, though the sun was going and they'd worn their good shoes, they stooped down in the dirt behind the house to weed and clear the garden. In my final years, changed my bedclothes, brought willow bark and ginger, said a soft prayer, tied the healing string in knots until the moaning stopped, then took a comb to my hair. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's right. We care for each other. And so since I've been reading from this book forever, sometimes I like to let people choose some of the poems that I read next. So maybe we'll talk about some of those poems, and you guys will tell me. I also promised that I would do a little something special for Kimberly and Grace, so I'll do some of that, and then we'll see what you want to hear. And so my grandmother, Mary, switching back to my grandmother who was taken to the asylum. So she was there when she was 18. She always told us that she stayed there for 9 months, long enough to have another baby. It turns out that she was actually there for 2 months and 13 days and then had 1 year of probation where she had to go back and check in. And I always thought it was interesting that she held on to that time very differently than they held on to that time. When I was researching this book, another reason that it took so long for this book to come into the world, I was working on it in earnest for about 7 years, but I'd learned the story kind of 10 years before the book came out, was because we had to wait 75 years for the medical records. Because of HIPAA laws. So I couldn't see any of the paperwork from the hospital, anything pertaining to this stay until 75 years. So 75 years and 9 days after my Aunt Evelyn, the first baby, was born, me and 2 writer girlfriends took a trip to the Library of Virginia, where they still have most of these records for what is now Central State Hospital. It's still in existence, but it's a large-scale, full-service hospital now. And we went and pulled out the green ledgers that are about as wide as this table. And sure enough, 4 pages from the date, I found her name signed in on the ledger. And that image is there in the book. But this is a poem that kind of harkens back to that time. It's 2 months and 13 days. Though all her life she believes she stayed for 9 months, long enough to birth another, had she the means. And it's also for my poets in the house. There's so many different poetic forms in this book, because if you're writers, I think sometimes form helps you get past the really difficult emotional stuff. Gives you a nice little box that you have to work in. So there are lots of sonnets here and lots of other things. But this is a duplex, a form that was created by Jericho Brown, who won the Pulitzer Prize a few years ago. So you'll hear some repeating lines. I return home carrying someone else, not in my body, but in my blood. Loss in my body, but in my blood, nothing's changed. I am just like my mother, something strange, sly, and hushed. Why are mothers every doorway every host. I am every door. Give way to every host. When you let things in, they haunt or anchor you. Let children in to haunt or anchor you, and they'll be there forever, long after you've gone. When I dream of forever, there's laughter, song. I do God's work, with or without him. God works with or without me. I return home, burying someone else. Thank you. All right, so some of the other things that I think, poets are thinking about when we're putting together these collections, I knew this collection had to kind of see them through from birth to a kind of end of life, and maybe we'll end there. But also, it had to see through what was happening in American history. I realized kind of halfway through the poems, this was the first book I had to make an outline for the poems to make sure I wasn't missing anything as I started writing. And I realized I'm writing about 1941, and hadn't mentioned World War II once. So you have to kind of start thinking about the way that things would fall in line in their lives. And one of the threads for my family often is not necessarily what's in the newspaper, but certainly what's on the radio. And so we're a family that loves music. I have a 6-year-old grandbaby who right now is probably dressed as Michael Jackson. There's probably a sparkly glove going through my kitchen at full speed right at this moment. But I thought it was important for me to use music as kind of a crux in some of the places here, particularly to show some of the joy. So we'll move to some of those joy poems. And you might show your age here, but that's okay. Anybody remember a song called Tweedledee by Laverne Baker? Uh-oh, Grace, I see you. So this was one of my grandmother Mary's favorite songs. She used to sing it for us all the time. But it was also something she used to play while she sewed for all of her daughters. She ended up having 7 children. They all made their way well into the world, including that first oldest child, Evelyn. And so Tweedledee by Laverne Baker becomes famous because it's really upbeat, has kind of a Latin feel to it. And I'll just sing the first line or two for you. So, Tweedly, tweedly, tweedly dee, I'm as happy as can be. Tweedledee, Laverne Baker, 1955. I make my own joy, sewing the girls' dresses, put the needle between my teeth, spin thread around the bobbin, press the pedal to the rhythm on the radio. Beauty at my hands like creation. What I dream, I see. It comes to be. Saturday, sun rising, and soon Miss Terry will knock to share the word. She talks about Jehovah like he's a friend to me. It's peaceful with the music on. The children run down the block. Their voices echo and volley, chorus of mother's hours. Given time, I'll embroider flowers, initials in each collar. I'll make them matching sets, maybe add a row of lace. I am swaying and bolting fabric in place. Nimble and sharp, the pleats are near perfect. Nothing's wasted. I'm happiest when I can hold my gifts. I count it as grace to dance, roll my hips. Johnny, my husband, takes the back steps and finds me singing. He spins me around the room till we are dizzy, till the oven timer buzzes, till another song plays. Laughing, ears ringing, I iron the dresses, careful of everything I've made. Thank you. That's a very sweet. Thank you. So we can do this one of two ways. I'm going to let you guys pick some poems here, right? So if you actually read the book and you have a leg up, don't cheat. Okay, but if you're looking at it and there's something you really want to hear, we can talk about that too. But the poems go from page, really page 5 to page 121. So somebody want to yell out a page number? We can see if we can sneak that poem in. I'm very interested. 77. Okay, and you say I'm very interested. I'll find it, and let's see. It's a picture. Look, it is a picture, but I will let you pick. Oh, I will let you pick. So it's an image because it's the end of one section to the next. And one is the very last poem in Mary's section. So Mary, who I just read about with the girls. And the other, oh man, is a poem that I don't know if I've ever read on the whole tour. It's a prose poem that is about a woman who's having a map to escape braided into her hair. I knew when I sold it that we were already there. So I'm going to come back to that one. But Grace, you're holding your poem for the next one? I am. Okay. All right. Well, let's read that. So a part of a work like this, you're also thinking about what parts of history that came before these women might have led to parts of their stories. So this is 1830. And this is completely imaginative, except for the fact that there are documented cases here in Brazil of women, when they were trying to escape to freedom from enslavement, having maps being braided into their hair. So you would feel your hair, it would tell you, turn at the gourd, move at the tree, right? And it takes its title from a beautiful piece that's actually in the National Museum of African American History and Culture. It's a piece that's made up all of Black women's hair accoutrement, picks and braids and all kinds of cool stuff. Commemorative headdress for her journey beyond heaven. I sat the early night under watchful care of guardswomen, Lily, who wants to be Dawn, her small girl, Rose, who will become Iona, and Eve, who will stay Eve in this life, one eye a weary cloud and one on my unveiled head, all huddled in our dirt quarters, waiting to be discovered. The night cut from both ends gave us little time for breathing, less for tracing the route in my hair. They use wool card, water, and seed oil to fashion a plait. Plodding the straight and winding way, a comb made from bits of bone burns my scalp. Eve, she sees the route, sometimes with her good eye closed, and I was born brave, surly, and wry, white folks say, meaning I must be watched for all my wandering into the wrong row, the lash, almost anywhere, a country, a reckoning of its own. I am almost born a bird, say these women who saw me landed here, almost a comet, wild-eyed, strands streaked with gray, face ageless. I leave tonight with all the makings of an unknown journey. I run for a doorway, river, hearth, a cave with a ladder. If I am caught, what body will return? My crown, they'll loose me of it. If I am dragged back, they'll burn lie into my skin. In heaven, I'll have my body. Wade past what freedom they know. This furrow of want and the root in my hair, the patience of the wild guiding me, the guards make me repeat what comes before the map. Trace black moss along swamp's edge. Find the stone mile post at the base of the water where dying trees bend and lean. It's Sabbath Eve. Nothing on the path but stands of angels, also hiding, but the deep tract of living. Scarf perfectly black as skin and thin to keep the map from unraveling. Years from now, remembering this, it will seem like a dream. Brief sleep in the hollow of a tree. My palm, a lover reading my hair. It was a good pick. Thank you. I've never been able to read that on tour. I thank you so much. Thank you so much. So, poets, we get to imagine things, right? And get to imagine the context of things. So you find one little inkling that you love, then you expand it. Go ahead, Grace.
I'm very interested in the WPA.
Yes.
Because some people don't even know, the young people don't even know what that
Can you
was.
get me more water?
And,
So sorry.
So perhaps you tell us what the WPA was.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think
Oh.
on page 20,
I think everybody ran. I was trying to just get the husband to do the husbandly duties, but everybody ran. I thank you so much. I'm sorry. I know I'm going to have 8 glasses of water. I appreciate you all. So tell us about the WPA.
I
Yes.
think you have 2 sections, one on page 20, and I think it's very profound that they interrogated your grandmother
Yeah, it wasn't an interrogation. So the WP, because I want us to know that there are sometimes wonderful public government programming that happens. And so what happens with the WPA, most folks have heard of what happens after the New Deal. So we're trying to make our way out of the Depression. Oh, hey. I'm so sorry. What's the WPA? I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. Works Project Administration. And so, and also, there are extended notes in the back of the book on this too. So don't think, if you're reading it, you're like, well, she's just using all these acronyms. I don't know what she's talking about. It's all there, I promise. But of course, historian shorthand, you've been doing this so long, you forget. It's just a bunch of acronyms. And so that program comes about as part of the New Deal after the Depression. And what's happening is there are lots of people, particularly artists, who need jobs. Right? So they're hiring writers and educators who have lost their jobs in the Great Depression and saying, all right, here's a project that I want you to work on. Some of them, we still have plenty of gardens in the Norfolk area where people are planting trees and then writing about what's there in the historical city garden. There's also this project for the ex-slave narratives was huge. There are thousands of these interviews that are recorded. And you can still find them. If you Google them right now on your phone, it's not class, so you won't get in trouble. You can Google them right now during the reading. You can Google WPA and Minnie Folks, and her whole 11-page narrative will come up. What's interesting about Minnie's narrative is usually someone would come to your house, you're 80 years old, usually it would be an anonymous white person that you didn't know, and they would knock and say, all right, tell us what you know about slavery. And you would say, it was great. I remember it was okay, right? So a lot of the interviews are a bit skewed. But what happens with Minnie is she is interviewed by Susie R.C. Bird, a Black woman teacher who worked in Petersburg and was dear friends with her daughter. She interviews her daughter for a different project almost 15 years later. So that's how I realized, oh, these are family friends who knew each other. So Minnie's interview ends up being quoted a whole lot because, oh snap, she is not holding anything back. She is telling the truth. She's like, girl, let me tell you what happened when, so she's talking to her friend. So you get very different. If you go through and read them, you'll see very different kind of skewed accounts from people. But also what's fascinating is some of the questions that they ask during the narrative. There's a whole list of them here. Maybe I'll just read a few of them off. Because I know we have to end with a poem and we got about only 2 minutes left. No, we don't? Okay. I'm at my 30 minutes in 2 minutes. 10 more. What Grace says we do. And so we'll talk a little bit more as well. But right there on page 20 and 21, what they would do to try to prepare people for these interviews is they were interested in finding out kind of some of the scope of everything that they could find out about what happened if you were enslaved. So they would give people who were going to be interviewed this questionnaire, and the questionnaire itself was about 400 questions long, and I'm not exaggerating, you can still find it. So obviously you never got through all of those questions with one person, but you get very different accounts based on the questions the interviewer chose to ask. And so they're there. Here's some of the questions. It's under a poem that's called Questions That Need Answering. And these are literally the questions that were there. I just chose some and kind of moved them around. So it starts with question 2, age. How does he know his age? And we start with 2 because 1, of course, is what is your name, right? 8, teeth. 9, voice. 10, eyes. 28, who administered punishment? 74, what did slaves do when it rained? 84, beds. 85, beds for children. 86, pictures. 94, was it pretty? 153, did slaves ever sit down in the presence of whites? 185, was there ever any bad disease in the quarters? 186, did doctors of midwives ever take slave babies? 189, did slaves ever practice contraception? 215, where did slaves sit in church? 220, what were the regular slave vacations? 236, did slaves assemble at times just to sing? 242, did you see the stars fall? 311, was your former master in the Klan? 322, did you or your people build a home after freedom? So right? Just the questions, right? And this is just the history that we're kind of missing because we didn't realize that anyone had even asked these questions. And so part of the work of the poet is to illuminate what's missing in history, even the underseen, right? Because it's there, but sometimes we can illuminate it for ourselves. So that was part of the work that I wanted to do. And also, I just really appreciate the work that these WPA interviewers did. This is not easy work to like go to a town and talk to people and find out who was enslaved and then try to hunt those people down and then try to get them to sit with you in a very difficult conversation to bring up probably their hardest memories ever. So I just appreciate the work of writers and the work of historians. We're not always perfect. It's not always perfectly accurate, but at least it's nice to know we're always trying, right? The writers are always trying. We're the empathy builders. I told some doctors here that today. Yeah, the doctors and the writers. So that's part of that WPA. That was good? Wonderful. All right, so we'll read some of the joy poems at the end. Then we'll talk a little bit. We have a poem that we're going to pass out, right? Okay. So we'll read some of the joy poems at the end of the book. We'll talk about a poem, and then we'll just hang out. All right. So, oh yeah, let's do that. Okay. So three poems. So another thing that happens when you're writing a book like this, Minnie and Mary, of course, never actually met. They never actually intersected. They were just kind of in the same proximity. But some of the similarities in their lives, ended up being kind of miraculous for me. They both lived to be 84. And both had 7 children that lived into the world. Minnie actually had 11 before her children passed, but 7 children that saw them to the other side. And so one of the forms that I went back to is a lovely poetic form called the contrapuntal, where you have one voice on one side, one voice on another, and then the voices together make their own poem. So this is Minnie and Mary lived to 84. And I'll read both sides and then across. Minnie, born slave, my heart gave out, failed and betrayed me, too big, maybe, delivered what little love kept me alive. Dark and wondrous, my hands are skillful, a slave again, even in my people's eyes when they ask all those questions. I run to the fishing hole, sing in the light. I believe the past is one teacher, not the whole spirit. And this is Mary. Born free, my kidneys won't filter out what they need. The world had the soft carapace of the body, steady as steel, until I became a bent flower, heavy stone. But sun, a new day comes over and over. Worry won't have me. I work the garden, pray in the dark. The body withers, not the whole mind. And then this is Minnie and Mary together. Born slave, born free, my heart gave out. My kidneys failed and betrayed me, won't filter out. Too big, maybe, delivered what they need. What little love the world had kept me alive. The soft carapace of the body, dark and wondrous, steady as steel. My hands are skillful until I become a slave again. A bent flower, heavy stone, even in my people's eyes. But son, a new day comes when they ask over and over all those questions. Worry won't have me. I run to the fishing hole. I work in the garden, sing in the light, pray in the dark. I believe the past is one teacher. The body withers, not the whole spirit, not the whole mind. Thank you so much. All right, so we'll read one last joy poem here, and then we'll do the Lost Friends poem. Okay, so I'm gonna read this poem. So probably while I was in edits. Like a book like this takes a long time, and the edits are when you are down to the wire, baby. That's it. Like no real changes are supposed to happen. But I kept talking my husband's ear off about the fact that this is amazing. All these things happening. Can you believe we're here? I wake him up with this like talk. And finally, one day, he stopped me in my tracks and said, "You didn't write that poem." Rude and also accurate. And so while the book was in edits, I wrote that poem. And so I hope, I hope it becomes a mantra for all of us, but certainly it's a mantra for the folks that I know who've carried us here. So there is nothing in your story that says you should be here. Let's just call it what it is, miraculous, or nothing but time and chance, a hair's breadth of the divine sense of humor. What wasn't planned, but tickled everyone watching. First, the nearly indestructible forced onto ships, then babies born on plantations, surviving the South, daughters and sons impatient and fearless, heading north. A girl follows her sister from Norfolk to Fort Monmouth. A boy sees her picture on a mantle and vows to marry her. Those were my parents. His father fell in love with a waitress in Petersburg who served him sweet potato pie and milk, a baby herself, and he, slick-sleeved, just stationed at Fort Lee. He carried her as far from there as he could, on and on this love, up the coast, in the heart of all wars. Children die and children gather. One finds another and every star extends its hand to a new windswept door. There should be no possibility of you, but here you are, an opening, a crossing. And here, every instrument brimming with sound, every seed a body inconspicuous in the garden. You are a spectacular disruption, a tempest. And with that knowledge that you have been remarkably made, call to yourself in the distance. The world will arrive to meet you, and you will not be afraid. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, I do know which poem. Yay, Lost Friends. And we can share if we don't have enough copies, because I think a lot of people came, and we're very happy about that. Yay, share. But we'll also, yes. If you share, I'll come be your friend after. Yay. Yeah, I think we have a few more. Share. Yes, 3 people can look on together. We can pass it down. Because I think our hope, yes, there's more. Oh, there's plenty more. Okay. There's a few over here. There's a few over here around the table who don't have. Just slide them across. There we go. A few more. Perfect.
I'm supposed to give the audio directions?
Yes, please.
Because we are streaming, the camera will remain on Ramika, and when someone wishes to raise his or her hand, wait until the microphone comes to you, because this is being streamed, and people can hear your questions. They requested that. The audience has requested to hear that. If you'll kindly give your name when the microphone comes to you, and your affiliation, whether you're a visitor to the college, faculty, student, we would love to know that. So we have more. I can give out some more.
There's more? Okay.
So
I think if you don't have one, please now just take them because we made the copies. Okay. So now I think that's almost everybody. I think a few people in the back are sharing. Yay. Woohoo. Okay. And so Grace and Kimberly, I don't know how this has gone before, but should we read the poem and then people can ask questions specifically about this poem, and then we can ask questions about everything too. But I think we wanted to kind of talk in depth about craft so you could see how one poem was laid out on the page? Maybe? Okay, so just a little bit of context that you would see in the book for this poem. This is called a frontispiece poem, which means it's a poem that comes before everything else in the book. And it's not actually in one of the sections. So many people think of it as kind of like a thesis for the book, right? And right after the poem is the family tree that I was telling you about. That's kind of like designed in the book. So it links to the poem, so that's why I was showing you the family tree. And so you'll see as you're looking at it that it kind of looks like a newspaper column, and that's because that's what it's based on. So starting in 1865, right at the end of the Civil War, almost immediately, in black newspapers and then in very large newspapers as well, eventually the practice went on almost to the 1920s, there became a column that is called Lost Friends, period. And people would usually, because most were illiterate after being enslaved, would usually get pastors or friends to write a note to family members to say, hey, I was named Johnny, my master's name was Graves, I'm still in this city, I had a wife named Mary and 2 sons, Jake and John, that were sold away from me. If you know where they are, please write to this address. Right? And when I started researching this book, I had never heard of this column, right? And there are literally tens of thousands of these ads placed over time. And there's a really beautiful book by a historian, Andrea Williams, called Help Me Find My People. It comes from a line from one of the Lost Friends columns, where she actually traces some of the families who were brought back together because of these columns. These historians do it all. And so I decided, because I felt like I was orphaned in many ways, and I was looking right at the beginning of this journey before I started writing many of these poems, that I would write my own Lost Friends column to tell people what I was looking for. So this is Lost Friends, and they all started with a little note from the newspaper or from the editor. So note, we receive many letters asking about lost friends. All such letters will be published in this column from the end of the Civil War until those in need stop looking, and if this isn't the case, in perpetuity. We make no charge for publishing these letters from subscribers to the Southeastern Herald. All others enclose 50 cents to pay for publishing. Pastors will please read the request published below from their pulpits and report any case where friends are brought together by means of letters. Dear editor, I wish to inquire for the women in me, in the interest of my mother, father, aunts, uncles, and a great many cousins. I want to find my people. They were carried from us when I was less than thought of. In their dreams, they called me Seaborn or Glory, but now I am called Still Becoming. My parents' names are Here, Holding. Uncles' names are Sprightly, Long Gone, Whisper, and Roadbed. Aunts, Hunger, Child Free, Child Many, Want, and Wanting. My cousins are like blades of grass or kudzu and can barely be chased or named. Some were here, some are dead. Before the war, these women were held by masters most of us have swallowed, but each eve return as odd growths under our skin. Mother's mother and father's grandmother's grandmother were barely living in Petersburg, Virginia. They were within miles of each other and did not know blood was nearby. We heard tell before then, one was brought by a family named G or Blackburn, the other by some called Hyman or Knight. They died, and we fell to others. I was born and have not heard from them since. Friends, if you have footing on their whereabouts, please address me at Stillwater, Virginia, with letters, keepsakes, any knowledge of what's come of us. Yeah, so let's talk about it. Yeah, and you can ask anything, like craft, obviously, lots of lyricism here, you know. My aunts aren't actually named Hunger, Child Free, Child Many, right? But anything, yes.
And tell your name and your affiliation.
I will, Grace. So I'm Donna Rutterow, and Grace is my mentor, and we just published our second book, 6 of us, and Natalie here is one of us.
Woohoo!
Yeah, woo-woo. So, in poetic form, what drew you to write like this? Did it start as a child? Was this something you grew into? Give us that background, please.
So just writing, and that's a great question, Donna. Like writing in formal verse or just writing poems at all? The whole thing. Okay, so my background at writing poems. I think writing in poetic form came much, much later when I started reading lots of poets. So I say read lots of poets because you can see what cool things people are doing that you might be able to break into and out of and recreate, in different ways. But writing poetry itself, I started writing poetry after a teacher, my 5th grade teacher, Miss Myers, brought in Langston Hughes. She brought in Mother to Son. Well, son, I'll tell you. Life for me ain't been no crystal stair. You know that poem? And I had never heard a poem like that. It sounded like my grandmother's voices, and I realized, you can write poems in the voices that you know. And so I wrote my own poem. She brought in the poem because she was about to make us write our own poems. And I wrote a poem about heritage. Still writing the same book, Miss Myers. And I won the district poetry contest in the 5th grade. And they gave me a trophy, and it's still the only trophy I have because they don't give trophies to people who can just read. And so that was my entree into the world of poetry. What a good question, Donna. Thank you. What else? What other questions? And questions about this poem too. Like we're still deep in it. So.
My name is Max Oakes, and I graduated from the Graduate Institute of St. John's College
Wonderful. Hey, Max.
a few years ago. Thank you so much for this treat of hearing your voice. You mentioned, I think it was a poem about Mary, that sometimes when you get stuck, you use a poetic form to break past. You mentioned maybe one of the difficulties was emotion, or
yes.
could you speak a little more to that?
Oh.
How you use a poetic form to maybe get started, or
Yes.
if that's what you meant.
That's exactly what I meant. Thank you, Max. That's exactly what I meant. I mean, this poem that you guys are looking at is a good example. First of all, you see how it gives you a contained space. So if you're thinking I'm writing a newspaper column, can you go on for 4 and 5 pages? Absolutely not, right? So automatically it gives you the kind of finite space that won't let you overwrite. And I think sometimes students in particular are kind of scared of form because they think, are kind of scared of form because they think, oh no, it's got all these rules and it's going to be difficult. And, form for me though, the rules help rein me in, especially when I think, I'm just going to go on and on about this topic, and it's just going to kind of be emotional spillage on the page, right? And nobody wants that because it doesn't get across anything very clearly. It's just like, oh, so sad, right? And so for a poem like Lost Friends, I really, this is one of the very early poems that I wrote for this particular book. And I wrote it for something else. The American Antiquarian Society was doing a special issue, and I was writing that wonderful poem from page 77, well, just beyond it, that ends up being about, the poem itself isn't wonderful, I'm not giving myself kudos, but about the image of someone braiding in their, the map in their hair. 1830s, 1800s. So they were looking for poems between 18 and 1900 that harkened back to things that happened at that time. So that poem, and then this poem was a poem that I wrote because I was just looking for things in history that I'd never seen before. And this would be considered a found form in many ways, right? Because I'm emulating the newspaper that's there. And poets are great with this. You might see a poet who writes something in the form of a recipe, right? Or a rune. So it's kind of a found form. But because it already has some built-in constraints, it keeps you from going too far off the ranch. And so that's why I love it. Thanks, Max. It's a good question. What else? What other questions? Yep, I see 2 over here.
Hi, I'm Catherine Goodrum. I'm a student here.
Hey, Catherine.
And I was wondering if you could tell us about the poem you read with those 2 voices that then came together for a third poem, and just what it was like writing it, how you came to that form.
Yeah, it's so funny. Catherine, as soon as you said, what was it like writing it, my true brain answer was hard. it was very difficult. You know, I will say, for poets that are thinking about writing their way into like family history or difficult history, I never cried so much writing a book. And you're like, I was reading, working on this book in earnest for years, and I would be like really boo-hooing writing these poems. And then I remember looking at myself one day at my own computer screen going, you can't cry over your own poems. Like, I was just so upset with myself. But really, it's because you just don't know what's going to come up when you're trying to bring these voices back, especially some voices that you knew. And I didn't realize what weight of responsibility it was going to feel like, particularly in writing that poem that's about, Mary and Minnie together. I was kind of at the point where I wanted to say, but don't you know, these are the people that these are the people that loved us to life here. Right? They cared for us in every way. And you don't want to be at a family reunion with us. We have a good old time. We are a joyful bunch. And I was writing about such difficulty that I wanted to make sure I didn't lie about the whole scope of their lives. That they ended with real hope and faith and joy. And so that's the thing that I was thinking of, but I turned to form again because you can go on and on and on about that, right? When you're talking about the people you love, you want to brag on them for a long time. So for me, the form was a good way, especially the contrapuntal, because the lines have to be fairly short or they don't work across, right? There are a few of them in this book. And so it really forces you to just use, in the words of Lucille Clifton, the best word every time. And so that's what, you're trying to do as poets all the time. Yeah. Yeah. We had another question. Oh, there we go.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's beautiful.
Oh, thank
I'm
you.
Layli McNair Bakhtiar. I'm a local poet. I wanted to ask about your joy poems.
Sure.
And so I had a couple questions. Were they expressions of consolation in time from times of sorrow? And did they attempt to show home as like a fable or a myth or something that you could achieve? Because they seemed magical.
Oh, I thank you so much, Layli. You can tell when a poet's asking a question because that was layered and nuanced. I appreciate that. But one, we'll work backwards. Was I trying to create myth? I think poets are, we're doing that in the midst of everything else. Because no matter what, I'm recreating voices, right? These aren't their voices. They would have probably said it differently. They would have told their own stories differently. But I wanted to be true to the whole of who they were. But I think, yes, part of the work of the poet is myth making, and doing that standing in the firm light of truth, right? So I think it's kind of both of those things. And so I wasn't trying to mythologize home, but I was trying to make sure that home was shown in as many facets as I could throughout the book. And that's why you really picked up on that. The title of the book is Room Swept Home. We come back to this idea of home in as many ways as I can possibly think of, a difficult home and a favorable one, right? And so that was one thing that I was trying to do. Now, remind me, Layli, what was the first question? Oh, yes, yes. Were the joy poems consolation for sorrow? Absolutely, yes. And I mean that in a very literal way. I know we're talking metaphor and poets. But I mean that in a very literal way. As I did that outline of poems, I was outlining their lives and thinking about historical things that had to happen. But there are points on the outline where I just said, joy, dancing, music, right? Because there was so much weighty heaviness that was happening that I knew even for me as a reader, I needed to make sure that I built in some breaks, some breathing room for readers. I was thinking about the fact that I would have to have this book in my hands and carry it and take it to people, and I wanted to make sure that there was joy there. But also the real truth is they lived long and happy lives. And I wanted to rest there. Yeah. Hey, we got two. Okay. Yep.
Lonnie Malcolm. I was interested in, as I was gazing at this poster and the title of the book, Room Swept Home, as related to your statement about poets deal with the underpinnings of history and details and particulars. what does this title mean?
Yeah.
Room swept. Why do you use the word swept? Home, because it seems very specific and very particular in relationship to the broader issue that you just previously mentioned about the various ways that we see home.
Yeah.
But there's something about swept that seems important to you, or at least I'm reading into it.
You're absolutely correct. I can tell you've already figured half of it out. Really, that's true. I think it's a double entendre. There's lots of things happening there. But both of these women lived part of their lives as domestics. So we went back to that idea, the literally like cleaning out of spaces, but also the title poem, the last poem in the book, Room Swept Home, it talks about them even sweeping the dirt in front of, you ever known anybody just to sweep the dirt in front of their house? This is the way that, older women used to keep house and remind us that no matter what you have, no matter how small it is, this is your patch of earth and you tend it, right? And so I was going back to that idea of sweeping and then sweeping things clean. I mean, we're kind of cleaning out our closets here, right? I mean, the underpinning of American history and often the things we don't talk about. And in the family, these were not things we talked about. People had no idea. Most of my cousins had no idea that my grandmother had ever been sent to an asylum, that we had, someone in our family that we could trace directly to certain plantations on, in Chesterfield. So these were things that even us, like we weren't talking about them. So this idea of sweeping, of cleaning up, right, of letting things out, that those two kind of tandem things were what I was thinking of with Room Swept Home. Yep, it's a good one. And then I saw, there you go, one at the end of the table and then one in the back right here. And Grace and Kimberly, I hope you're okay, those are the last two.
Hello, I'm Linda Paez. I'm here on behalf of the newly renamed Banneker Douglas Tubman Museum. Honoring
Yay!
Black women in history. And as a Black woman in American history, as you are, I'm wondering, has anyone approached you about translating your work into other languages?
We've been in talks with a few. This book, no, it's very new. It's just it just came out in February. I've had a few poems translated into Arabic, believe it or not, thanks to wonderful poet E. Ethelbert Miller, who's out of D.C. I'm sure some of you know Ethelbert. We've been in talks to think about translating some poems into Spanish. Nothing has come to fruition as of just yet. We've been talking with a wonderful Scandinavian scholar who's been doing all of this work on contemporary African-American women poets. So we're talking about some of that. So nothing has happened just yet, but if any translators in the room, call me. I'd love to talk to you. Please, we need these stories all over the world. Linda, I was about to say, it's kismet. Let's do it. I mean it. So we'll continue to work. We know you're one of the carriers of the archive, so we'll do that. And then we have one more. Yeah.
My name's Dylan. I'm a first-time visitor, but I received a women's studies minor in college, and I remember how shocked I was as someone who went through a very traditional education system to learn about the pieces of Black women's history that were lost or erased and now missing from public consciousness. Yeah. And as you moved through your writing and discovered all of these things, is that something that you found drove you from one piece to the next?
What a good question, Dylan. You guys find brilliant people and bring them into the readings. First-time visitor. Thank you, Dylan. I teach now in English and Women's and Gender Studies, so we discover together in that field. And yes, I mean, you're constantly, when you start turning over a leaf in history, good gracious, the whole tree falls. So you are constantly amazed, and I am a nerd to the 10th degree. Man, do I love digging into history and love being in archives. I have to actually rein myself in when doing a project like this, because you could find things to write forever. But absolutely, Dylan, I feel like I was driven from kind of one piece to the next. And also part of the work, I think, of a poet is illuminating those pieces of history in addition to your original idea. So my original idea was to write about my grandmothers, but illuminating the pieces of history that kind of became these pinpoints in their lives became a kind of secondary work throughout this project. And I think it's spurring me. I think I found my way into the next book of poems, and it's exactly that, Dylan. Yeah. Hey, thank y'all so much. Thank you, guys.
My love. Follow us to the bookstore. I will lead my way to the bookstore. Yes, wait a minute, what?
Nobody leave. Sign in on the sign-in sheet, please. That's really important. And then come to the bookstore. Even if you're not buying books, I would love to just meet and see folks before I leave. I gotta hit the road after. So even if you don't feel guilted into buying a book. But come to the bookstore. So
Buy the book and feel guilty. And more of her books are there too.
yes, the other
And December 7th is our next occasion. We are going to have Chinese translator from the Tang Dynasty. And one of the faculty, Stella, how do you pronounce SHU in Chinese? HU. Shu. Stella Shu will be part of our presentation. Thank you. And follow us to the bookstore. That was beyond brilliant. Beyond